Well, hello, my lovelies. It is so wonderful to see you again. Today, we have a very fun story for you. It's called Sacrifices and Rewards, but it's only part one because it went a little too long. Now, the artwork to this story is going to be displayed tonight at the Fremont in D. Ryan Allen's art show, High Adventure, a Dungeons & Dragons art show. The story is loosely based, well, it really isn't based on Dungeons and Dragons. It's just using dragons and such. So I hope you all don't mind. But let me get into it without further ado. Sacrifices and Rewards, Part 1. I stared at the runes inscribed in a circle on the floor of my workshop. This was my last resort. It was the last resort. All of my other plans were gone. I normally detested witchcraft and spellwork. I'd always thought myself above it. Well, I had also thought myself better than to petition a deity for aid, but things change. I now, however, held a special hatred for witches. It was because of their petty stupidity that I was about to undertake this horror. I sighed. When all of the trouble started, I had remained confident, complacent even, in my time-honored methods. It burned in my guts, just how stupid I had been. Complacency is costly, as it turns out. My infant son had been set upon from the day he was born by all of the dark magical workers in the surrounding lands. My unceasing question of why they cared about one tiny child went persistently unanswered. He was such a bright little soul, too, and the love of my life. He would light up anyone around him, always playful and kind, to all with a ready giggle. I couldn't fathom why anyone would want to hurt a baby, especially one like him. At first, I laughed it all off, secure that my spirit guards had things under control. My guards kept warning me not to take it so lightly, and while it was concerning, I just thought they wanted to be extra cautious, Then my ancestors stepped in and came with more dire warnings that I had no choice but to listen to. As I protected my son and my home more and more, the onslaught of dark magic became worse and worse. I was beside myself. I didn't know what to do or who to go to, as I had exhausted all of my resources to get to this point. I had finally, in an act of desperation after my husband Thiel had been cursed into trying to kill our baby, he ended up having to throw himself off of one of our castle towers in order to stop before he hurt his son, Barharan. Begged the gods for help, for a solution, for a guardian, and for vengeance. It was then that one of the gods came, the deity named Tarak, began helping me. Every spell and enchantment that he gave me worked, but came at a terrible cost. The latest of which had been to pack up what I could and travel to the Midlands after burning our home to the ground. It had bought enough time for my son Verharan and I to escape. The deity guided us to an abandoned multi-spire castle on top of a mountain's cliff, dark as the blackest night and boasting tall, slender towers lit with spectral lights of various colors. It had a small river that encircled it and spilled over the cliff's edge to become a waterfall feeding the mists below. It was beautiful in a discomforting sort of way. I would later find out that Verharan and I's new home was host to a whole army of dwarves who mined the mountains below. Some monstrous king or other had oppressed them long ago. Even though the king was gone, the dwarves had decided to keep mining, and so had hoards of gems and such stashed away. They had decided that mining was their purpose and had just continued on with it. The king had long fled or been driven out by the spirits that he sought to conjure and control in an effort for more power or perhaps more life. Maybe both. Judging by the library and the workshop in this place, the man had gone slowly insane. Well, his misfortune suited me just fine. A thorough cleansing and blessing had helped make the castle ours, and the dwarves decided that they worked for us now, which was nice. They seemed happy to have a new liege. Never really considered myself the liege type. For a time it was peaceful, and then the dark workers found us again. When I beseeched Tarak again, he instructed me to acquire a nanny from the dwarves or find a sprite, as these races were impervious to all magics due to their own magical nature. He had explained as to relieve my worries about someone else watching my son. After what had transpired with Thiel, I was understandably worried. He said that she would appear when I needed her most. I hadn't had to wait long. Teala, half-dwarf, half-sprite, had been chased onto my lands by a pack of dark workers who had wanted to take her heart and use it in some kind of ceremony to enslave her people. She had told me that she had the oddest feeling she was needed here and that she would be safe here. This was after I found her, soaking wet and keeled over by the river. She had been just inside my borders when a harpy attempted to drag her back out of my lands. The harpy, the agent sent by the witches to retrieve their prize, was unable to cross my borders or be near the river, which I found very interesting. I would have to ask Tarak about that later. I had kept Teala in a hut by the cliff while she recovered in case she was a trap rather than a blessing. Some of the dwarves checked in on her and reported to me until she was healthy enough to speak with me directly. After some discussion, we decided that she would help with Varharan. He absolutely adored her anyway, and that she also would assist with some chores and house management. Teala brought much-needed support and cohesion to the household. The dark worker onslaught persistently increased, which kept me in close contact with Tarak and quite busy most days trying to protect our home. He gave me advice and taught me different magics until the witches began to find ways to breach my lands and then my walls. They sent foul creatures and all manner of demons every night and many of the days. It had been 7.5 long years that this battle had raged, with very little respite, and I was exhausted down to my bones. If I had the chance, I would have ended them all. The latest attempt on my son had gotten too close for my comfort, and once the witches had tasted even that much victory, they hungered for more and mounted a physical assault. They stood at my land's borders as I stared at the magic runes on my floor. And while they poured their energy into breaking down my wards, I had a decision to make. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. I lit all of the candles and stepped into the circle, then began the chant of the spell that would hopefully save my son. As I chanted, the writing around me began to glow, and then it seemed to pull from the floor to swirl around me, whipping faster and faster and changing colors, white to green, to red, to blue, to purple, to black, to gray, and then back to a whitish ivory. Once the color of the light steadied, it drove in at me and imbued my body with its light. I levitated off of the cold flagstone floor, my bare toes hanging in the air, when sudden mind-numbing pain hit me. It grew in intensity, and I screamed involuntarily. The glow began to move around me like a maelstrom, and I began to swirl with it. Faster and faster I went, the pain growing sharper and more intense until I heard a sharp, tearing sound. My bones began to lengthen and change shape, and then in an instant it was all over, and I was on all fours on the stone floor once again, which no longer felt cold to me. I looked down to see my green robes lay in a puddle stained with red beneath me. I heard footsteps pounding up the steps to my workroom door, 2 sets by the sound of it. I was dismayed but unsurprised when I saw Varharan burst through the heavy oaken door, with Teala hot on his heels. Varharan was mute. He was born this way, save for a few words, but was fluent in a sort of mind-speak that incorporated feelings, concepts, and words. He usually just used the fact that I could feel what he needed to communicate. "Mama!" Varharan cried, looking from my robes to my new form. "I'm sorry, baby. This is the only way to keep you safe." My heart was heavy with sadness as I looked in my little boy's dark eyes and saw my new form reflected back to me for the first time. I knew the price of the spell. The spell would grant me all of the knowledge and the power to defeat any who would stand against me and mine. But it would cost me dearly. It had its perks: immortality, power, damn near omniscience, imperviousness to all magic by my new nature. I would become the guardian that I had begged for to protect my child, and I would be forever. But I would never be able to hold him again. I didn't have time to wallow in grief. I needed to go and get what I was to do done. I turned from Varharan with a heavy heart and walked to the tower window. I looked down at the distance and slipped out to my new skybound home. As I spread my wings and soared over the lands and cliffs, I felt the witch's terror. And rightly so. They had cost me so much. They would pay and pay with interest. The spell had chosen from all possible forms the best one for my predicament. A skeletal dragon, a lich dragon. I steadied myself. Flying was as natural as breathing to me now, and dove towards the gathered throngs of witches and their ilk. When the dark workers realized that I was coming straight at them without slowing down, they began to retreat. It didn't matter. In the blink of an eye, what had once been 100,000 dark witches was now a smoking crater in the ground. Some readied their death curse, and 2 or 3 had time to hurl them at me. They bounced off of me and back onto the casters. And I smiled. And that's it for part 1. Tune in later for part 2. It is already written, but I don't want this to be another 20-minute video. All right, you all. Try to make sure to check out Dee Ryan's show. It's tonight at the Fremont in Des Moines, Iowa. And I believe it starts at 6 p.m. So, loves to you all. Like and subscribe for more content.